students of Reddit, what was the reason for why one of your teachers had a breakdown during class? My JH biology teacher legit used to have weird ass flashbacks of when he fought at Vietnam. It was pretty sad to see. My math professor in college was going through a divorce and they were fighting for custody of their 2 younger children. You can tell he was irritated because he wore his emotions on his sleeve. One day he came into class about 5 minutes late and he was physically shaking. He was violently crying and apologized to us and said the class was cancelled. He apparently lost the custody fight with his ex-wife. My 8th grade Spanish teacher and the freshman baseball coach were having an affair. It eventually became public knowledge and she had several breakdowns as her divorce played out over the course of my 8th grade year. I had the pleasure of joining the freshman baseball team the next year and experiencing his own share of breakdowns from his own divorce. My favorite science teacher in high school was slowly being forced out by administration. One day in class she stopped teaching and sat down in front of us and told us she had just been diagnosed with MS and began sobbing. The entire class got up and gave her a long group hug. It is one of my most cherished memories from that chapter of my life. My university physics professor got the call that his dog had died right before a test. Needless to say, we didn't have a test that day. I feel legitimately bad about causing this one. Junior year of high school. My lit teacher was from Wisconsin and had a very thick Midwestern accent. This was in the South, so a number of her intonations were very noticeable. In particular, words with an ag syllable stuck out. Egg. Bag would be pronounced like a mixture of bay and egg. She was reading a passage from Beowulf to the class one day, and to paraphrase the modern English translation, came across the following sentence. Beowulf killed the dragon with the dagger. It was too many Midwestern syllables too close together for my friend and I to handle tactfully in our 16-year-old mindsets, and involuntarily, we laughed. Upon attempting to cover it up, it probably sounded more like a snicker, and she did not take it well. I wish I could say that she scolded us, but it was so much worse than that. She shut the book, looked at the floor and straight up cried for what must have been 45 seconds, but felt like an entire 45 minutes. Dejected, breathless sobs. Once she had recovered from this, she picked it back up where she left off, like it hadn't happened. Even though, generally speaking, I really disliked that teacher. It sucked knowing that our immature reaction caused her to feel ridiculed. We didn't have malicious intent, but the result was the same, and we of course apologized to her privately after the fact. Not my teacher but my younger sisters at the time. The class was making fun of her recent miscarriage and her mum dying of cancer. Yes, teenagers are cruel. I have a story for this one. A few years ago, I took a class in design theory. It was the pet project of the head of the college, and taught the design principles behind everything from common household objects to room layouts to entire organizations. It was an absolutely brutal class, but uniquely informative. One day, towards the end of the semester, we went over the use of humor in design. The professor spent the entire class talking about how laughter and amusement can be used to engage an audience and change how people see a situation. The whole time, he was laughing, cracking jokes, and good ones, too, and generally making sure the class had a good time. And at the end of the lesson, he told us not to underestimate the power of laughter. After all, it was how he had gotten through the lecture that day. His father had died a couple days prior. He broke down crying after he told us. It's probably the most impactful lecture I've ever attended. One time in math class the emo girl was not having it. I don't even remember how it got started but she ended up bickering with the teacher and the emo girl called the teacher Thunder Tits. It was at this point that the emo girl was sent to the office and the teacher had to take a seat at her desk in the back for a few minutes. We made our English teacher cry, but we didn't want to, because we really liked her. She was about to switch to another school and she had some really important things to do. She needed to call someone, so she gave us a task to do and left the room for like 5 minutes. We were a horrible class, around 16-17 at this time and mainly boys. We had breakfast together that day and stuff was still in the classroom, so the boys decided it was time to throw it around and hit the window with stick of butter. While one boy tried to clean the window, Using a squeegee, is that the right word? Never used it before and I'm not native. Someone else decided to throw out the trash. Another teacher came because she saw the trash flying by the window of her classroom and in the moment she stared yelling at us. The other teacher came back. She immediately started crying as she saw what was going on. I think she was angry and overwhelmed because she liked the school and didn't want to leave. But in this moment we were the little assholes making the decision easier. But the next week, she came into the class and had written a small poem for us about being too old to throw around trash and playing with butter. A duck had said he'd piss on the teacher's grandpa's grave. He HD died 2 days earlier. There was this science teacher already on the verge of a breakdown. We called her Molecule. Someone wrote that on a leaf of one of the plants in the class and she started crying and pretty much had a breakdown. My history government teacher has been to Vietnam and it's quite known that he was on the front lines. So in the middle of a lecture a girl raised her hand and asked, "Have you ever killed someone?" The question caused him to go silent and leave the room for quite a while. Luckily the girl was ripped a new arsehole by her fellow classmates. Grade 10 science class. We were taking turns using some kind of lung capacity measuring device. Breathe into a tube and a small plastic ball gets raised by the force of your breathing. Something gets measured somehow. I can't really remember details aside from the plastic ball. Anyway, the teacher takes his turn. Apparently trying to show off with how hard he can breathe out. Somehow breaks the measuring device. The teacher goes into a rage after realizing he broke it. Briefly tries to fix it. Gives up. Picks up a metal garbage can and throws it in anger. Storms out of the room and doesn't come back for 10-15 minutes, at which point he returns and acts like nothing happened. It was more bizarre and amusing than anything else. She was a substitute teacher at elementary school, and at some point a kid took it too far and threw a bottle at her. It was an empty plastic bottle, but still. Poor teacher. The 9th of November 2003. We were in first period and we had a moment of silence in remembrance at the time that the first plane hit the tower. I think it was a Channel 1 thing. The teacher broke down. She was panting, pulling her hair, and began mumbling to herself. The mumbling became louder and she started to pace. Finally she walked over to a coffee pot that was in the room and picked up a large Ziploc bag of ground coffee, while screaming, "I wish this was Coke. I need it right now." She then fell against the wall and slid down. We let her go for a minute or two before a few of my friends and I went over and helped her up and walked her to the front office. We got the best long-term sub ever after that. A true influence I'd only seen a few times in all of my schooling. Edit. I was a senior in high school. Although on the East Coast, we were not close to New York, and to my knowledge the teacher had no connections with anyone from New York. Reading through these comments, I will never understand how some kids can be such pricks. I can provide a more positive breakdown from years ago. English teacher realized 5 minutes into the discussion of a book that only a few people had done the assigned reading, and he put his book on a table and went on a tear about how you can't just go through life assuming that other people will pick up your slack, and that it's important to value your education and not just bullet your way through classes. I could tell he was disappointed in the class and several students were embarrassed for not putting in a little bit of effort to read a ducking book. The teacher learned that one student cheated on a history essay. After getting this kid suspended for 2 days, repeat offender, she discovered that almost 2/3 RDS of her class in that subject was cheating as well. I don't know what happened after that, but she literally broke down when she found out that my class knew about it. We were in a different subject, so we weren't a part of this scandal. The one that sticks out is my history teacher, who was a level 10 incompetent at anything. She usually blathered on through class about stupid things. She was always very well put together, dressed well, hair done. It's just there was no substance to her teaching or conversational topics. One day, she started talking about a co-worker she was very close to when she was young. Mind you, she had to be approaching her 60s. The story started out innocent enough where we were all basically ignoring her, and pretty soon it veered off into this terrible reality. Her co-worker had gone home from work and died in a car accident on the way home. This had to have been 30 years ago. She was crying, saying how much she missed her and how crazy life can be. The way she explained the story was so sad. 2. They had made plans the following day, and my teacher was excitedly waiting for that co-worker to come in. I disliked that teacher immensely, but I felt so sorry for her. She stood there, crying because her friend was gone. I don't think at 15 I could imagine that sort of loneliness or pain. But now, a good 15 years later, I've had her experiences, and I sympathize with her. He was showing us a diagram of a baby in the womb when it started off as an egg and the diagram was spinning around, and we kept asking if the baby spins out for 9 months and does it get dizzy etc. He headbutted a locker lol. I wrote a paper about a difficult life experience I had growing up and it made her sob. I just wrote about my sister on the day she died and how I felt the few months after that. When my mom came in for a talk about my grades, they talked about loss and cried for a while. I can tell you I felt very awkward in that classroom after that. My IT teacher spent 15 minutes trying to figure out how to turn the volume up for a video. An IT teacher, mind you, someone who teaches in technology, didn't know how to turn the volume up. When she finally figured it out, the whole class applauded and she broke down and left the room. Admittedly, this makes us students look bad, but she was an awful teacher who clearly had no clue about anything in the subject. We didn't like her, so we let her figure it out herself. The teacher was bullied and disrespected every day. One day an idiot threw a geometry compass and it got stuck on a cork board, like when you do knife throwing, right beside her while she was writing on the board. Instant meltdown. In tears. She left the class and I never saw her again. Can't blame her. She probably thought her life was in danger at this point. Some schools' neighborhoods are very hard. 2 girls were chatting during math class while one did the other's hair. My math teacher couldn't take it. Got a beater stick and slammed it on the one girl's desk, yelling no hairdressing. We were all shocked. It was odd. Joke's on him. She became a hairdresser. During my freshman year, the culinary teacher went on leave while she had a baby. We made a pact to not talk at all for the whole time we were there. We had a little radio that we played music on while we worked and we only played Country Roads. This was before it was a meme. After a few weeks of this, we all got pretty tired of it but decided to stick it out. One day, the sub was explaining the recipe for us, and she just started begging us to say something. We all kinda just looked at each other as she started crying and none of us knew what to do. She walked out and didn't come back. We all felt super bad. I still do. One of my friends had a seizure in math class in middle school on the second day of class, and the teacher screamed and ran out of the room. Someone put a pillow under his head and someone else called the office. They found the teacher hiding in the bathroom. My friend group 20% of the math class requested to be transferred to a different class because we didn't feel safe with that teacher in case of a medical emergency, just to try and make her feel bad. Students kept disrupting class, being obnoxious and making fun of her to her face. She was one of the good teachers who unfortunately had been the majority of her life. I'm so glad I'm choosing to become an elementary school teacher because good god, some of these replies. Wasn't a teacher but we had a toothless bus driver. Kids were ducking with him so he drive the bus back to school. When he left the bus, someone wedged a trash can in the door so it couldn't open. A toothless man eventually got back in the bus and was screaming, etc. I felt sorry for him. Sorry Dewey. He had them at least 2 lessons. Do Americans call them lessons? I'm not a native speaker, sorry. A week. Which was, believe it or not, the amount of lessons we had with him. He was pretty mentally unstable to begin with, but it got much worse at the end of our last year in the school. Anyway, the dude would literally yell his lungs out at something as trivial as getting up from a seat too slowly or being late, and I don't mean raising his voice. I mean ducking, screaming like the world was about to end. He had a big hole at his desk which was the result of him repeatedly slamming his fist at it throughout the years. As a former teacher, I say a very hearty duck you to any and all of you who shame and ridicule teachers. We don't get paid enough to deal with that on a daily basis. Never been so happy to have a retail job. Nasty customers are nicer than some of the stories here. Not my teacher, but had a class in room attached to hers. She was given an entire load of level 1 classes, basically the complete and total duckups who would be dropped out, in prison. pregnant, etc. before they hit 16. Keep in mind that this was middle school. Those kids smelled blood in the water and it was merciless. Parents didn't care. Principals sitting in class. Suspensions and detentions did nothing. Just merciless. She snapped. Like institutionalized snapped. Her contract was not renewed. Mrs. Bradshaw, who was a terrible teacher and should have been forced to retire before the Truman administration, came into class and put on an impromptu one-woman play about why students should donate to the United Way charity fund that was running. This included, but wasn't limited to, her throwing a shawl over her head and putting on a really racist accent to be a foreign child getting their first set of crayons. We all laughed and snickered at her and she threw a fit that lasted the whole class period. A few weeks later, she said something to me and I talked back. I don't remember what, when she turned around and fastballed a ruler at my face. I ducked out of the way and the kid behind me took it in the eye. He was wearing glasses. High school earth and space science teacher lost her cool completely, taking a week off after someone called her olive oil to her face. She looked exactly like her. Shop class teacher had a really bad Vietnam flashback and ended up flipping over his desk. Turned out a student put an acid tab in the guy's coffee during first or second period and it kicked in around third or fourth. The student was never caught out and the teacher took the rest of the year off. Too bad too. Really nice guy. Once in high school, 9th grade history teacher. We just didn't listen to him. We were downright disrespectful and looking back I feel guilty for being such a redhead. We'd all get to class late and speak over him trying to teach the lesson. Sometimes we listened, because tests eventually come around and some of us want to pass. But most of the time we were total jackasses until one day he erupted. After that day we never saw him again and we got a new teacher. We treated him with the utmost respect. A new teacher about 2 years after graduation went to jail after someone set him up on Craigslist. Chris Hansen style. Once in middle school my class made the dance teacher cry because we refused to pay attention that day. Usually we were good. A little loud but good. IDKY this day we were particularly rowdy. She just broke down into tears because she didn't understand why we wouldn't listen and started crying about why we didn't like her and how she tried so hard to make us listen. We straightened up after that because she was really sweet with us all the time and really believed in us. They were shooting spitballs straight in her hair when she wasn't looking at us. One hit harder. She brushed her hair, grabbed and looked at it and freaked out. Left the class by slamming the door. One time my professor came in really freaking high, like eyes red, laughing all the time and all. He was going through a divorce. We all loved the guy because he treats us with respect and genuinely loves to teach. So we didn't care and just let him be. Okay, so I was in 7th grade at D. We had the nicest teacher for science. One day this nossouled ginger kid decided he had enough of her bad teaching and called her out on it, including a few middle grade insults such as the classic retard, lonely, and straight up boring. Long story short, she ended up crying and another teacher had to come in until she calmed down. After 20 minutes she came back like nothing has happened and the ginger kid was moved from her class. What a D. I taught kindergarten last year and I had to hold myself back one day from just telling a kid to shut the hell up. I got to shut and turned it into shut your mouth please. That class put me on blood pressure meds. My really crappy teacher in year 6, I live in England, got mad at me on my birthday because I didn't move places within 3 seconds after telling me to and shouted at me. The pure shock of the incident made me fall off my chair and the whole room went silent. I wasn't that hurt, but my god was I pissed as I was lifting my chair back up. I don't know what got into me, but I gave her the middle finger. She began screaming at me again, but I just ignored her and did all the work before anyone else could. She went back to her desk and just sulked for the rest of the day. But once she went to the bathroom after lunch, because our class was in the main hall, where we had lunch and assemblies, we had to clean up. It was a low budget school. I was lifting one of the tables with my friend, and I noticed something on her computer. One of the minimized tabs of Photoshop had a small bit poking out, and being the curious 11-year-old I was, I opened it and saw a class photo with me out of it. Whilst it wasn't the most extreme breakdown, it was pretty messed up. My math teacher in 8th grade was extremely pregnant and our exchange student from Brazil called her beautiful. She broke down in tears and admitted she didn't feel very pretty. Went to an all-girls private school and the biggest itch scratched her laptop and wanted a new one. So she threw her current one down a set of stairs. During class, my classroom had the door open and the teacher was the best but very stern. She got to the hallway to check out the commotion and lost her absolute mind on this girl, who absolutely needed it. Another teacher heard the yelling, came over, and my teacher came back into class to a room full of terrified and confused students because we had all remained in our seats. Carried on class like normal after that. My social studies teacher back in middle school. He was new, taking over for another teacher who mysteriously retired halfway through the year. The kids just went nuts with acting out for whatever reason. During one class everyone was being so unruly that he looked like he was going to snap. He had no control. He left for a minute to cool down and came back to find that a bunch of idiots were now sitting upside down in the chairs. And snap he did. The worst part, in rage, he tried throwing something as hard as he could at the wall. Unfortunately all he had in his hand currently was a tissue. Despite all the force of his crazed pitch, the tissue just kinda fluttered for about a foot. I will never forget the look of impotent rage that swallowed up his face. I think that was when he left the room. Of course he stuck it out and become one of the best and most influential teachers of my life. So it all turned out okay. Back in kindergarten, it was a while ago, our kindergarten teacher started crying and yelling at us because we wouldn't behave. She was always a dysfunctional teacher but she got really angry. In 2nd grade our teacher got so angry at one kid for making noise that she picked him up by his collar. In 6th grade, our teacher got really upset because there was so much drama between us that there were legit planned fights. I went to a private Catholic school. My senior year of high school, I took an AP psychology class, was one of the best teachers in the school. This teacher had been there for like ever, and everyone liked her, and never thought that she would retire. Her whole classroom was covered in ducks, like rubber ducks, duck decals, holiday ducks, light up ducks, and more ducks. I had her the last period of the day, so we always had some laughs. We found out about halfway through the year that she was in fact going to retire. During the last week of school, she showed us a video that explained the ducks and why they were important. Now she has watched this video a million times, but this time was different. We were the last class to watch it with her, and at the end, she just sat there for a second and then started crying. She loved teaching. She loved teaching psych especially, and she loved the connections that she made with her students. And it all hit her in that last class that this was the end of her teaching career. She wiped off the tears and gave us all little graduation ducks that had all had a cap and gown on. And she told us that we could all choose our favorite duck from around the room and take it with us. I still have my purple duck from her, and it goes everywhere with me. My grad duck is always in my backpack. She really made an impact on all of her students, and we all will be her ducklings forever. In elementary school, I had a classmate who ate paper. One day he ate all the answer keys for our upcoming tests. The teacher started yelling, then crying. She left the room and the school for the remainder of the school year.